Hi, good morning, or indeed good afternoon. My name is Ben. Thank you for joining me today, where we are supposed to be talking about configuring Microsoft Teams telephony like a pro. However, the eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that I'm joined by two colleagues, rather than the one that was meant to be on the advertised setup. So, unfortunately, Ben Dobson, who is our head of our engineering team, is allegedly very poorly today, has lost his voice, so can't join us now. We'll test this later next year, where hopefully he'll join us to go through what we're meant to be covering. But I'm joined by two colleagues from the pre-sales and consulting team. I've got Zach Bennett and Karl Smith. Zach, do you want to just say hi and give us a quick overview of what you do, and then Karl can say that he does the same stuff unless he disagrees.
Sounds good, yeah. So, hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Zach Bennett. I'm a UC consultant at LoopUp. Been around Microsoft technologies since coming out of uni about 6, 7 years ago, and probably concentrating on Microsoft workloads for probably the past 4 or 5 years. So,
Good stuff.
hello.
So, Karl, anything to add to that? Is that 6 years
And
and
to
nine
be
years?
honest, yeah, exactly the same. I've got a little bit of engineering background, which is a little bit different from Zach, but exactly the same. So yeah.
Good stuff. And you guys have been around the block a little bit with helping customers do UC and more specifically Teams deployment. So hopefully in the next 15, 20 minutes or so, that's what we'll just kind of, pick your brains around a little bit. So I guess to get started, in some of these other webinars and discussions, we've talked about if a customer wants to deploy Teams, they broadly have two choices, which is you go for direct routing or you get calling plans. That those are changing slightly in that there's Operator Connect coming along, but that's sort of like a version of a hosted direct routing platform. And when you do direct routing, you have choices to go either deploy it yourself or you come to a partner like us who can deploy it as a hosted version. But down to kind of the nuts and bolts. If a company is wanting to deploy telephony inside Teams, what do you think are some of the most important aspects that they should be considering and looking at about their environment? Like what should they be doing to get ready for doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll obviously like chip in if you've got anything to say, but yeah, absolutely. So the things that I've kind of noticed is when people are obviously trying to kind of utilize Teams telephony, there's just kind of a few bits and pieces they really need to make sure that they've got ready.
Hmm.
If they're already in 365 and they've already got a tenant, then great. They're the types of things that we would obviously want to have configured at the start. There's obviously things to begin with where maybe you're running on-prem AD, maybe you need to synchronize those identities and get those kind of UPNs to the right kind of format. So kind of just a little bit away from Teams telephony, but really kind of tenant kind of prerequisites in general.
Okay.
Um, there's obviously things around making sure you've got the correct licenses and all those types of things, and just really having a full understanding of what you're trying to achieve and making sure you've got the relevant licenses for that.
So, I mean, Zach, what would you advise for a customer around licensing? I guess a lot of the companies that we're dealing with generally have the enterprise, the E SKUs of licensing. What's the specific things they need to worry about for Teams telephony?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things definitely is know what licenses you have got and what's included in your licensing.
Hmm.
Um, Big one for especially telephony is making sure that you've got the phone system license or the Teams phone license available to you, whether that be as an add-on license with something like E1 or E3, or if you're already a company that's utilizing an E5 license, for example, you're going to already have those features included in your E5 full package.
Yeah.
So just making sure you know what you've got, and if you want to use those telephony features, make sure you're getting the correct licensing to go along with it.
And I guess that's one of the things is it's around preparation, isn't it? So even if there's elements that you need to wait to spin up around if you're deploying gateways or having a platform set up, things like the Microsoft licensing might be a long lead time item to get them from whoever your channel provider is, and then make sure that you're allocating them to your users in a timely fashion. Because what's kind of the standard delay you might get when you change a license for someone? It doesn't necessarily apply right away,
Yeah,
does it?
definitely. So what I always say is um, expect a 24-hour delay, because you may get that when even applying licenses, making changes around Teams. It is in the cloud, so there's definitely those sorts of replication issues that you need to think of, or plan into your deployments.
Yeah, and it was a good point you made there, Karl, wasn't it? About, like, again, the starting point might be that, we're assuming that someone has an Office 365 tenant. We're assuming somebody has identities synchronized between on-prem somewhere or on-premise somewhere up to on-premises somewhere up to to the 365 tenant. But I guess would you say there's an element of kind of data cleansing as part of the information gathering in preparation, making sure that because when you come to enable en masse, you can't do it necessarily through the Teams admin portal or console or center, TAC, Teams Admin Center. You're looking at doing PowerShell and some scripting. And again, that's stuff that we can help with our engineering side of things. But, you often run into people might have double-barreled surnames, or their names have changed, their UPN might be different. So there's an element of kind of data cleansing to do there, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, historically, a lot of kind of businesses are an on-premises kind of environment. They have their on-prem AD. They've been maybe running multiple domains, multiple forests. There's obviously that level of just making sure that when synchronizing your identity, you just need to make sure that it is kind of right and correct, because obviously it can cause problems if not. So it's a good kind of prerequisite kind of thing to go through. Yeah.
And in terms of project approach, like from our point of view, the area that we three involved on this call at the moment is kind of in the pre-sales and consultancy. And the consultancy side blurs a little bit over into delivery, in that there's elements around kind of workshops and best practice and helping advise what things look like. But as we get into projects, and we had Adrian, one of our project managers, on last time talking around kind of project process, there was this thing about a CCF that needs to be completed, the customer configuration form. Like, what's the next steps after you guys have been involved of what happens with a customer?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the kind of the whole like CCF form is obviously that kind of like one centralized place for all the information. May it be kind of the users that you're going to look at implementing, making sure that you've got any sort of specific kind of requirements around maybe custom dial plans, for example. Maybe they need to be able to dial something and something else kind of come out the back of it. So there's these kinds of things, and utilizing that kind of like central document to kind of contain all information is very, very helpful when looking to kind of go forward and enable the sites.
And so that CCF is that this user has this phone number and this queue is configured in this particular way. But again, I guess kind of one of the things the customer needs to understand about their environment, and therefore anybody needs to understand if they're looking at migrating to Teams, is what they do at the moment with their telephony platform. And I think we were talking before about gathering that information is very important. Do you have any particular kind of hints, tips, or processes that someone can go through to find out what they use at the moment?
I mean, the discovery process is definitely one of the most important aspects for when you're looking to move your telephony. Understanding what you currently have can be hard for some organizations, especially ones that we talk to that truly have that global reach. It's hard to know exactly what you've got in some random warehouse in the middle of the Netherlands. So kind of best practices is maybe or things there to do is try and know who is your kind of go-to person in that area. And I've found it very helpful just to we've done it with customers before where we've literally found an on-site IT person and gone, okay, walk me into your comms room and share your screen,
Point at the cables, show me what's
exactly.
what.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something that's helped me and my customers.
And I guess also stuff we've done before is kind of cross-referencing whoever the current provider is. You want to be getting a bill out of them and looking through what you're actually paying for on a bill to make sure that matches what you think you've got in there, and kind of doing a bit of cross-referencing. But I guess it's fair to say that there's always going to be surprises, right? Because telephony traditionally is the box that lives in the back corner of the comms room somewhere, that things have just kind of changed organically, and you can end up with a mess of digital delivery and analog delivery and integrations to other bits and pieces. So you can have some fun there. I suppose actually as well. maybe look for your viewer and recommendations of how to approach this. But when you figured out what you've got, it's not just about the people and the numbers and the usage. It's also about devices and other integrations. Is that something that you have to pay particular attention to, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Just from kind of recent kind of workings with customers, just the breadth of things that they don't realize they have, and then realizing that if we don't have that, then things are going to change. The business as usual is going to be like, oh, okay, we need to definitely have either an alternative which is kind of more modern, maybe a SIP-based alternative compared to like analog connectivity, or just mainly just getting an understanding of how these things work is obviously one of the big kind of due diligence kind of pieces that is obviously recommended. But as Zach said, it is quite a big kind of piece of work for some companies. So it's definitely worth looking into it, and then obviously come into your kind of the partner you're working with, and giving them an idea of what you've got and where you're going.
So there's a question just come in there from someone asking about, are there any particular hints or tips or anything that you should do if you're migrating from, say, Cisco or an Avaya platform? I guess, kind of part of the early phase of considering a migration is doing that feature comparison. But do you find a feature comparison between something like Cisco and Teams is a fair thing to be doing?
It's a difficult one, because in some cases the features that Cisco have may be a lot wider and a lot more capable in terms of what Teams could potentially do by itself. But nowadays, from what I'm seeing, customers are looking to kind of remove the kind of complexity that these kind of Cisco call managers and kind of Avaya kind of solutions are currently kind of providing, and looking at completely simplifying it. It's when it comes down to, obviously, maybe you have Cisco vendor specific integrations that you're looking to kind of move across, and maybe looking at kind of provide, maybe for example you have maybe like a fax requirement that's needed at a site, or you need to kind of look at an alternative to that. Then there is ways of kind of migrating across to a different solution utilizing some more Teams-based technologies.
And I suppose that's where you've got, for example, a reception workflow. You've got in Teams auto attendance and call queues that you can build and glue together in a particular way, but that might operate in a different fashion to what a Cisco or an Avaya platform might be. But that doesn't mean that you can't replicate the business requirement or the bit of functionality that you need. It's just that it happens in a slightly different way, because now it's not just whether in Cisco or Avaya an extension is busy. In Teams, it's whether a person is busy, or a person is in a meeting, or a person is available, rather than like, so it's what's the phrase? It's the paradigm shift, isn't it? That you kind of need to have about how you look at and consider your telephony. So if we're talking about, the key main steps of getting ready is just gather as much information as you can, both about your environment, your PBX, what you do with it, and then you can kind of map that. What would you suggest would be the best approach to then actually deploying? Do you just, Zach, you need a 24-hour lead time potentially for the Microsoft changes, right? Do you just push that on a Friday and people are good to go on a Monday? What do you do? What's a sensible thing?
I think that could definitely be a trap that some organizations will fall into. That it can be that easy. Let's just do it now, and get it started, and make that change. But I think it's important to make sure that you're still following, and I'm sure Adrian would have spoke about this during his talks. But making sure that you're running your pilot phases, making sure that you're doing your required testing and then validation out the other end, and making sure that you complete the user acceptance testing. I mean that's one of the big things when you're even deciding to move to Teams, making sure that your user experience, making sure that your users are going to be happy and be able to use the system that you're then going to put in front of them.
So what sort of stuff would you be testing in a validation though? Because if you can log into Teams and you can make a phone call, then surely you're okay, right? Like what sort of components do you need to be pulling apart there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your deployment looks like. If you're maybe replicating some particular call flows via auto attendance and call queues, making sure that they're working, and you're particular routing method is what you actually want it to be, and that calls are actually passing to particular people.
So back to that, if you've redesigned stuff in a particular way, it might be that you've replicated exactly what you have had, but then find that that isn't appropriate in a team. So I mean, this is something that we had. I had on a customer in Skype for Business where they insisted after a deployment and a migration that they wanted every single person in a particular office to be rung when their main line overflowed. And I tried to make the point to them that that wasn't appropriate because the person might be at home or they might be, on the bus or whatever. And that's even more, true, I guess, in Teams, that you take your mobile phone with you, it's signed in, you can be, that can ring in Teams wherever. And I think it was by the end of the first week they'd reneged on that decision and wanted to redesign what they had, and for the better, because they hadn't appreciated that the system could actually be smarter than what they were doing previously. Okay. So what about gateways? We mentioned right at the start that SBCs might be an option for a deployment, and that's something that we use as well, right? So while we have coverage in many countries around the world, there are some locations where we're not quite there yet, or there's legal reasons, or there's requirements for interop with other bits of hardware where we would look to deploy a session border controller, an SBC, or a voice router. Is there anything in particular that you should consider as a customer around how to deploy an SBC? Do they have to be physical bits of kit? What do you do with them?
You could
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so kind of like there is obviously multiple versions of the SBCs. There is multiple vendors. You could go the virtual route if you've got maybe the capability of hosting a virtualized device. Maybe you've got a hypervisor at that specific site that you've got. You've got kind of the physical version if you're looking to maybe integrate some existing kind of workloads which need to have that capability of enabling the telephony. There's those kinds of things as well. But in terms of kind of the network requirements and things, obviously kind of having the ability to provide internet connectivity to that device potentially, having the kind of demilitarized zone, maybe a DMZ, given obviously the ability for that device to be in a secure kind of area of the network to do that. So there's multiple routes of taking these things if you need to deploy an SBC. Yeah.
So takeaway there is, there are some, not necessarily complicated, but there are some things that need to be considered. But again, there's flexibility in the design for how they're deployed and integrated to meet whatever you need, right? Is that the takeaway?
Exactly. Like it depends if you're integrating with maybe something that's SIP based, then a virtualized SBC would be great because it's more of an IP based solution that you're integrating with. Or if it's an analog workload, then you need to physically plug something in. Then a hardware based appliance would be kind of like the route to go for that.
Okay. And I suppose talking about devices, which we mentioned again at the start, and this maybe is also a little bit in that Cisco Avaya migration, what do you find people tend to do around devices for Teams? Because a Cisco or a Avaya deployment, it was a user had a phone on their desk, and there are soft clients that let you interact with that. But in a Teams deployment, do you find, are people running around and changing out handsets as they do the migrations, or do you leave the old phone on the desk at the same time? What happens there? What do you suggest?
I mean, I'm definitely seeing a mass exodus away from handsets, actual on desks, and customers not wanting that, bit of plastic sat there anymore. They would much rather, give users a headset, and they're already in Teams, they're already making chats in Teams, already in the actual, channels, and making VoIP calls via headsets. It's only that kind of natural progression to keep your headset on and then make a PSTN call straight out.
Yeah, then to kind of go a different route, I'm kind of seeing not the opposite, but in a different route. So kind of like the hardware for the devices is not specifically kind of being deployed like for users, as that kind of said. It's more in my case, maybe special kind of like edge cases. Maybe you have a workshop, or you have maybe like a lab or something like that you need a handset for, right. Maybe common area phones. So there's kind of different scenarios for them. But in all honesty, personally, I am the same as that, seeing a lot of more going the handset method, so maybe utilizing mobile devices.
Day-to-day use, you're maybe more headset, but you can accommodate devices where it's required. I mean, you mentioned their labs. Is it Are there any locations that you can't put Teams handsets? If there's particular radiation requirements or stringent, things like cable runs and all that sort of stuff, or are there ways you can make that happen?
If you've got PoE, I would probably say you could probably put a handset in a lot of places. So if you've got Power over Ethernet capabilities, maybe if you need something that is kind of maybe splash proof or like chemical proof or something, maybe getting one of those more ruggedized Android based devices and running maybe the Teams client in maybe a kiosk mode via Intune or something like that. So there's things to do in all cases.
You can
personally,
architect around. Okay. So, as we're sort of moving towards the end of our 15, 20 minutes here, post deployment, like you've done the migration, things have gone okay because you did your information gathering, you did your pilot, you did your validation, your migration was great, you dust your hands and you walk away, right? That's it. Project closes down and you're good to go, or is there anything we've missed?
I mean, one thing that I always like to do and talk through with my customers is the call quality dashboard. So this is something that Microsoft offer, where you can take particular information from your deployment or your environment, and it's more of a monitoring and tracking for how your users are actually experiencing Teams. I mean, you guys have probably seen the rate my call information that comes up after every however many
X
calls,
number
10
of calls, yeah.
yeah. You know, where can you surface that information and see where that's coming from? That's where CQD comes in. If you're looking, you're getting lots of calls from a particular site out in the US, you can see, oh yeah, they are having issues, and then kind of pinpoint that. So what I'm trying to say is kind of like a post deployment thing is, don't forget about it. This tool CQD is something that you should be coming to and checking those reviews, whether it be monthly, quarterly.
Do you just log in and use that, or is there anything you need to do or should do?
Yes. So kind of during your deployment, you fill in. It's like a building data file. So that includes all kind of subnets and network information for your particular locations. And then when you actually inside of CQD, you can say, okay, this calls made from this IP address are this location, for example.
Good stuff. Cool. Well, I think we're starting to come to the end. I was going to wrap up by asking you guys what your most exciting or interesting or challenging deployment that you've done to date before we close out. I think, the most satisfying one I've had was, back in the days, when I was maybe a bit younger like you guys are now. I was doing hands-on deployments. We ended up with a customer who was doing a full-on migration, dotting from Aberdeen to Glasgow to Manchester, Birmingham. Like we just had a complete 2-week back-to-back of going in, training people 30 at a time, get them in the room. There's a bunch of people running around, giving them out headsets and handsets, unplugging their old stuff at the same time. And we ended up just day after day with these boxes and boxes of Cisco phones, which was kind of grueling but pretty satisfying to get to the end of. Zach, what would be your most interesting experience?
I guess I really like the experiences where you're talking to a customer, especially around, say, kind of analyzing call flows or what they currently have in their system, whether that be Cisco or Avaya. And there's always, oh, I didn't realize Teams could do that. And that's kind of a yes, instead of taking that, let's just copy what you have approach, kind of twisting it into that kind of consultative approach of discussing the Teams features, what's available inside of that. So I kind of like any conversation that I can bring that in and add that.
Good stuff. Karl?
Yeah, and personally, back in my engineering days when doing kind of Cloud Connector Edition things, that was definitely my my most satisfying deployment, was getting that to run in a highly available scenario. So, yep, one of the good things there.
Cloud Connector was the little SBCs with virtual machines on board, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yep,
I
very
was going to
fun.
wrap us up there, but I see we've got 2 questions that we'll just address that have come through in the chat. So one of them is saying, are there any particular challenges, this is from Paul, around decommissioning the back-end hardware when you've done a Teams deployment? I'll start first, and you correct me if you disagree or have you, but it's one of those, it depends. So for a deployment to our platform, you are normally porting the numbers away and moving them to our carriers and our solution. If you're not, but if you are doing that, then it's very easy to decommission and get rid of the old equipment because you know that there's not necessarily any PSTN delivery still happening on the old hardware or old equipment. If you're maintaining that for any particular reason, it would be a gradual wind down. So I would recommend that you remove the old phone system from someone's desk. I would never recommend that you did dual running because it's just confusing for users about, well, do I call you on this platform or do I call you on this handset? And the handset's always going to win because that's what the person's had on their desk in the past. They will still pick that up and try and dial, and it might not work because you might not have anything there. So just take it slowly. If you've moved your numbers away, you're in the clear. Any insights to add to that?
Yeah, go on.
No, just maybe because that's kind of touching on user adoption as well. And if you are going to move that handset from a particular user's desk, make sure that they've already had training on how to use the new system, or that training's readily available. I mean, Microsoft give out so much of that already, or speak to your preferred partner. I'm sure they would be able to help with that.
Good stuff. And the other question has come in from Norman about SBC builds and the process there. I guess at a top level, you can choose to have the SBC as a physical gateway, and if it's physical, it's usually because you need to connect it with something like an ISDN, line or your circuit, or you need to plug it in to some other bit of equipment, be that your phone system that you're upstreaming or downstreaming or something like that. If you don't need to do that and all your connections to it can be SIP, then that can be virtual. You can buy them as appliances to run out of Azure or AWS, depending on which route you go. In terms of other requirements, then you're looking at whatever the vendor licensing is to make sure it can accommodate the number of SIP sessions and transcoding sessions that you need. Some of them have a Microsoft specific license that unlocks some of the functionality to do direct routing, and beyond that, it's things like you need to have a public IP address that can NAT through to the gateway, or the gateway is responsible for itself. You need to have a public name for it. You need to have a public certificate, and there's a bunch of kind of more network design related elements, but none of them are especially complicated. I guess the complication comes where you're deploying things like media bypass or LMO, which is where you've got one gateway and you want to kind of have multiple gateways underneath it, or making sure that media stays inside your company firewall boundaries where it doesn't need to cross out. Does that sound fair, you guys? You've done it more than me, I suppose.
Yep, absolutely agree with that. Yep.
Good stuff. Cool. Well, thank you both for joining us at last minute. So again, thank you, Zach. Thank you, Karl. The next event that we're hosting, all things being well, if Graham doesn't, what's the polite way, doesn't come down with anything, meeting on December the 16th. We're going to be discussing the Teams roadmap into 2022 and what that'll mean to enterprises. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.